Good morning, everyone. Today we're just going to work off a Word document, and maybe the last Sunday I will let you off the hook and have the verses on the screen. Next time round, we're gonna turn up the verses in our Bibles. Right, so at the moment we have our readings in Job and in Peter, and it is very nice that, and sometime in the reading in Peter, there's a reference to Job. Sorry, in the book of James, not the readings for today, um, to Job as well. And we will share some thoughts on that as well as we look at the book of Job. It's not a verse by verse exposition, and it is just some thoughts that I want to share with you. Most of them you might know of, but there's some new ideas there that I've come to notice lately. So hopefully that will be helpful to you as well. Right. So let's start off by looking just at the structure of the book very briefly so that we all can get an idea what the book of Job is about. So in Job chapters 1 to 2, we have Job's righteousness and the calamity. So I've left out words there, maybe just to make you think if you can fill them in as we go along before I mention them. So we're going to have the first two chapters all up, setting us up the scene as to what happened to Job. And we will read of what kind of man he was, and but also then the absolute calamity that befell him. We all know the story, I think, of Job, that he lost everything he had, including his children. 10 of the 10 children that he had, seven sons and three daughters. It might be a good exercise now and then to try and sit and ponder how you would feel if you had 10 children and you lost them all in one day. In Job 2 to chapter 2 to 31, the three friends enter the scene and they debate with Job about the reasons why all this has happened to him. And basically, to summarize their argument, they say, Job, you have sinned. And Job reasons with them and says, no, the reason for my calamity is not that I've sinned, I'm an upright man. So then in Job 32 to 37, the bottom right-hand corner of the picture there, we have chapters 32 to 37, where a young man, Elihu, enters the scene. And basically, his message to the three friends and Job is praise God. He is almighty and righteous. He is almighty and just. So, very young man, but an amazing perspective that he had. And that speech of Elihu, or that conversation he had with Job mainly, is like a precursor for chapters 38 to 42, where God then speaks to Job and he basically says, why do you question? You shouldn't question. I'm in control. God is in control and we can trust him. Although we don't ever know all the answers or can't understand everything, there's more than enough evidence as God gives Job that he is the almighty creator of all things and that he is in control. And the good lesson for us there is every day when we wake up, we should be reminded of the resurrection to come. We are on sleep and we wake up, but also we should look at the whole idea that the earth is in an orbit around the sun for thousands of years already. We have confidence that tomorrow it will be the same. So if God is in control of the whole universe, we can really trust him that he's not overlooking what's happening in our lives. And even if there's calamity, there will be some reason. Maybe we will only find out in the kingdom. All right. So Having said that, there's just the summary of the chapters in text form. Chapters 1 to 2, Job's righteousness and his calamity. Then we have the debate with the three friends. Elihu enters the picture, and then God speaks to Job, and the matter is resolved. So let's share a few thoughts that might help us in our lives as well in chapters 1 and 2. Then we start off with Job's credentials. Now, there is Job 1, verse 1. Notice what God initiated the conversation with the Satan, which we'll talk about after this. But it's and he in and God would repeat this to the Satan and with these same characteristics. So they twice mentioned to us. So there's a lot of emphasis therefore on what kind of man Job was. Job was a man in the land of Uz, and he was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. So there's four things there. He's perfect, he's upright, he fears God, and he eschews evil. Now the word eschewed, kind of the English word you something is skewed. It's not nice and straight. So and that's basically the idea here. If to eschew evil in the Hebrew means to turn aside from evil or turn off evil or move away from evil. And we need to ask ourselves in our lives, do we identify what is evil in God's sight, what is not righteous and pure? And then do we turn aside, go away from it, turn it off in our lives, don't participate in it? Or when it confronts us, like, Joseph in the course of Pharaoh, we move away, we flee away from evil. We don't put ourselves in those situations. Um, let's look at this idea of being perfect. So, perfect means to be complete and mature, and it doesn't mean you're without sin, right? So, in that case, none of us will ever be perfect until Jesus comes back, because we will still sin. The question is, what does it mean to be perfect? So, in Matthew 5, verse 43 and 48, Jesus makes a profound teaching about this idea of being perfect. And I want you to turn in if you have your Bibles in front of you, or just have a look at the screen. There is the text. And notice the conclusion and the high calling that comes from this for us. If we want to be perfect like Job, this is the idea. Jesus said, Matthew 5:43, you have heard that it has been said, you will love your neighbor, hate your enemy. I say unto you, love your enemies. It's a very difficult thing for us to do when someone is our enemy, to still love them. Bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you. Notice there's nothing there about wanting revenge or trying to actively go and harm your enemies, right? So we love them, we pray for them. That we are going to do, so that in verse 45, there we may be the children of our Father which is in heaven. So in other words, to imitate God, who's our Father, to be a child that imitates your parents, which children do very well, we will look at God, and then we will do what is said in verse 43 and 44. Then we are children of our Father. And notice why God is perfect, why God is mature. He makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, sends rain on the just and the unjust. And in our lives, then, often we are not very kind of picky and choosy about who we do good to. We just do good in general, knowing, like Jesus, that if you do good to 10 lepers, only one will come back and give you thanks. The other nine are unthankful. They are unrighteous. So Job, if you read Job like in our readings today, you will notice that sometimes when he mentions what kind of life he leads, he does good to the just and the unjust. And we do the same. So, verse 46, if you love them which love you, which is easy, what reward do you have? Do not even the publicans do the same? So, even ungodly people, show favor to the people who they will get a reward from. But it's definitely not a mature way of living your life. And verse 47, if you salute your brothers only, do you more than others? Do not even the publicans do so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. So the implications, be ye therefore perfect, means be like the previous verses, like God who will send good, do good to just and unjust people. So that's the kind of man Job was, and that we are striving to be. We do things because it becomes our second nature for our love for God to want to do good to others, not because of some wrong intention, we wanting a reward or whatever other intention we might have. Right. So notice now, very important in the book of Job, because there are basically two different interpretations of this book. The one interpretation that you will notice that I found unsatisfactory is the one where you approach the book and say Job is righteous and good all the time. And when, as a matter of fact, when you look at the book of Job, you will see that Job was perfect and mature before the discussions with his three friends. But it's important to notice that in the discussion, in the debate with the three friends, Job did sin and did make false accusations against God. And that was pointed out to him by the young man Elihu. And then Job repented and he was forgiven. And God was very pleased with him. So even in the negative connotation we get with Job in the book of Job, there's something embedded in there that is very powerful. And that is, we should be the kind of people like Job that are very spiritual and perfect. And then when we do wrong, we will be very quick and humble to see that if people point it out to us as an older brother, even if a younger brother points out something to you, you will be humble enough to quickly realize I was wrong. I did something wrong. And then get that fixed with God by asking for forgiveness and acknowledging it. And then God will quickly forgive us and we will be restored to our state of perfectness. So perfection does mean matureness, which implies we are the kind of people who do not have egos, and we are humble and of a contrite spirit, willing to learn and to listen and to improve until the day we die or Jesus returns. So still in chapter 1 and 2, notice now we want to quickly share a few thoughts about the Satan in Job. The one thing we really want to notice, which is very helpful in Job, is that the Satan of Job had absolutely no power to do Job any harm. God had to give the Satan opportunity to do some harm in Job's life, and the Satan had the wrong perspective, as you'll see in the verses here, that in verse 1, chapter 1, verse 9, the Satan answered Yahweh and said, doesn't Job fear God for naught? Haven't you made an hedge around about him and about his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the works of his hands, and his substance and increase in the land. So for us as Christadelphians, Job 1 and 2 is the chapter that people will always come to prove there is a fallen angel being that opposes God. But when you really look at the proper way of interpreting this, as we know that the word Satan is a Hebrew word meaning an enemy, and then in context of the Bible, you must decide what is that enemy. You quickly come with logic to this book, and you understand that this Satan that is referred to cannot be a fallen angel in the presence of God, because first of all, if it is true that there was once this being that rebelled against God, and therefore God expelled him from heaven, how come God will ever allow him to now go right back in the presence of God in heaven and come and accuse one of his people? It's an impossibility. Sin cannot dwell with God. So, this idea in Job that there was a day when the sons of um, God presented them before God is easily shown in the Bible to be Old Testament terminology for people on earth presenting themselves to God when they worship God. We all today, at this very moment of time, if you don't feel this or don't have that sense every time you come to a meeting on Sunday, then rethink this. We are all at the moment presenting ourselves to God, and we are in the presence of God because we've come to worship Him on a special occasion set aside for that. So in the Old Testament, whenever the priests worshiped God in temple, it says there they presented themselves to before the Lord. So they're not literally in heaven; they've come to worship. Also, this whoever this enemy is, um, he had no power. So this idea of some fallen angel walking around and making life difficult for us and bringing calamity on us is not a biblical teaching. Notice here that when God protects you, nothing else can harm you unless God allows it to happen. No one has the power to come and hurt us or create calamity in our lives unless God allows those events to happen. So in verse 11, the Satan has to ask God, put forth your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to the face. The Satan didn't say to God, okay, I'll show you. Tomorrow I'm going to make life difficult and I'll let Job, I'll take away all his cattle, and then you'll see he won't worship you. He had to ask God, um, in order to prove this point, you need to do the harm. So then God says to the Satan, and he gives him the power and says, I will allow you to let this happen. So we understand from the book of Job that the Satan here again is someone who is opposed to Job and has a wrong understanding of Job's intentions, why he's worshiping God, and therefore he becomes Job's enemy. And that's basically what the word means. Now, here's a very interesting point then. 2 points from Job then. Job and his wife, always in the book of Job, right through, identified the calamity that it was from God. Job's wife says to him in chapter 2, why don't you just curse God and die? Because God did this to you. Then Job says, no, why we must accept that God will bring good in our life, but also calamity. I'm not going to curse God. He's still a perfect man. Not blaming God or accusing God that is wrong, that this calamity happens in our lives. And for us, this is so valuable lesson to learn from the Bible, that God, the Almighty, is in control of everything, even our little lives. That is of great value to Him. So, whatever happens, it is God in control. He is the source of everything that happens in our lives. A lot of people want to have the problem then. So, why is this accuser, the Satan, the enemy in Job, not identified? And this is a great principle for us in the Bible. It is not important for this Satan to be identified. As a matter of fact, the Satan plays the least important role in this whole book of Job. After chapter 2, he disappears. The book doesn't even come back and say to us, well, this Satan was proven wrong. It is implied for everyone to see in the book that he was wrong. The reason Job worshipped God was not just because God blessed him, prosperity gospel. It was because he understood God correctly. He understood the purpose of God. And he also understood that bad things like with Daniel's three friends will happen to us. And we will say, we might be thrown in a fire, and if it's God's will, we will perish, but if it's His will, we will be saved. It's not a case of, like Daniel's three friends did not say, we will be thrown in the fire, but God will save us. They said, no, our God, we won't stop worshiping him. But if we're thrown in the fire and it's his will that we perish, then we perish. And that is a good understanding of the scriptures. So if you go to Jesus' tempter in the wilderness, again, that tempter is not identified. And the minute you come to the conclusion that it was some external person tempting God, Jesus, and not his own thoughts, people always want to know, yeah, but who is it then? There's no need to know who is it. What we need to know is that Jesus was put in a position where someone came and wrongly quoted the scriptures to try and get Jesus to do a miracle to prove that he's the Son of God. And Jesus overcame those temptations. So we always focus on the wrong thing, the identity of the tempter. The bigger lessons is what was the cause of the temptations and what do we need to do to overcome them like Jesus did. And in this case, in the book of Job, what was the consequences? We know that it is proven by Job's reaction that he worshiped God not for just gain. And then the tempter disappears. The Satan, after chapter 2, he's got no more reason to be in the book or in the play, and nothing's ever said of him again. He's very little deal in the book, so to speak. Um, Notice that a lot of people say, "Oh, the Satan came back because it was Elihu." And I will deal with that now, that Elihu is not the Satan in the book of Job. It's very important. Here are some reasons, and we can again learn valuable lessons from the man Elihu. He respected Job and his friends. He held his opinion and had to wait in patience, although he was very frustrated by the end, for these four elder men who were supposed to have all the wisdom, and especially Job's three friends had none of it. He did not interrupt them, which is a big lesson for me because I have that tendency to interrupt people. But Leona's helping me to do that lesson less. Um, but he waited and waited till they finished and they could say nothing more. They were out of breath and out of argument and so on. And then he said, now it's my turn to speak. The second point is much of what God said was repeated by Elihu. He's like a forerunner, almost like John the Baptist for Jesus. Elihu is the forerunner to prepare, especially Job, to be ready that when God comes and says these things all over again, he's already thought about them and could easily see the truth of what it was and then explain to God that he was sorry and that he spoke foolishly. The three friends was rebuked by God and Job and his three friends, but nothing is said in the book about Elijah being reprimanded. He gives his thoughts and then God just comes in right after and repeats most of it. Right. Also, it's very important to see that Elihu did not question Job's loyalty to God or the fact that he was a perfect man. He just pointed out what Job did wrong during the debate. It's during the debate with the three friends that Job said things that were wrong, and he pointed that out. And he really highlighted this whole idea that God is all powerful, He's the creator of all things. In comparison to that, we are all in our lives like minute little ants scurrying around on earth and a lot of times not knowing what's going on. And if we don't know, we either will still find out because of our growth in the truth, or it is not for us to be known at that time because of God's ways. But we must always praise God and always realize that He is just. Nothing that God does is wrong. It's all like Brother Mickey in his other exhortation or Bible class said so well, that if we're going to believe God is the Almighty Creator, then surely we must also believe that the plan He has to save us is perfect. And there's nothing wrong in this very idea that through suffering we will learn obedience. So, um, it's more important than for us to know that there will be people doubting our reasons for worshiping God at stages. And if that happens, like with Job, someone in that meeting that was on earth and where people came to present him before God had this reasoning with God, and in his heart might have been that he said, Job is such a righteous man and highly acclaimed, but it's all because of the wrong intentions. And then he was proven wrong. So let's not make Elihu the Satan. He was a young man and a very righteous one and a very spiritual thinking young man, Elihu. He was not the Satan. Satan appears after chapter 2. And there's no need for identifying him specifically as what person or who it might have been. God has much more important lessons for us to learn. We look at the next chapters, chapter 2 to 32. What can we learn from this? Notice in the debate, then, which Job has, up to this point, he's done nothing wrong. But in the debate, which was quite a heated discourse, here's a nice um, graph to show you the percentage of verses spoken by each character in the book of Job. Satan spoke for less than 1% as much as Job's wife. So, insignificant compared to the others. Notice Job's three friends spoke 19% of the time. Elihu spoke as one young person less than the three friends together, only 15% of the time. God speaks 12% of the time because Elihu has done most of the work already for God in getting Job's mind right. But here's the key. Job spoke 48% of the time. In If you take away Satan and Job and God, and you look just at the debate, the figures are even more telling. Job spoke about in the debate. Job spoke about 70% of the time, and the three friends only 30%. In other words, and you will see in the book of Job, Job speaks, then one friend speaks, then Job speaks, then the second friend, then Job speaks, then the third friend. Next round, the same. In the third round, Job speaks. By the time he speaks the third time, the third friend doesn't even speak. So one person outspoke three other friends in a debate. So what's the point of all of this? It is in all this much speaking that Job started saying things that really made him say some things that were wrong. So in the book, we have the friends arrive in chapter 3. There's a week of silence. For a week, they sat there and they just, um, at least gave Job sympathy and came to console him. And then Job is the one who breaks the silence and starts speaking. And we are the last people to come and point fingers at Job. I think if we all serious, think about it, we will all have done much worse. Because if you think about it, you are sitting there and you are sick. Your uh, whole body is full of boils. You've lost all that you had. You only have your wife left, and all your children have died. So Job starts off pretty bad, I would say, in the way he speaks. And here it is, Job. What is the first thing Job says? Job opened his mouth in chapter 3, verse 1 and said, "Cursed is the day." Basically, what he did in verse 3, "Let the day perish when I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man child conceived." Verse 11, did I not die when I was in the womb? Why did I not give up, and die when I came out of my mother's belly? So first of all, right from the beginning, we should understand now that the perspective of Job in his mind, which is so full of turmoil and under such pressure, you want to ask, how on earth can I possibly learn a lesson that if I fall in the same amount of pressure than Job, I won't do this? We do this when, we get up in a day and sometimes, things don't go right. We might lose our car in a car accident and we do this kind of thing. We just say things so negative. But implied, embedded in this approach of thinking is this idea of God doesn't know what he's doing. Why was I even born? Do we really believe that the day you were born, God was aware of that? He's in full control of that. And especially when you were reborn and baptized and you're a young baby and new in the family, every move you make is known by God. He is involved in your life. He doesn't steer it against your will, but he wants to influence you in your free will to always do His will. And therefore, the day you were born, God saw you as potentially someone who can be saved, who can become like His Son. And especially when we're baptized after that, we should never say, well, life is now so bad that, I wonder what God was thinking when He allowed me to live. I wish I would rather die. And there are two other people, especially in the Bible, that come to mind. If you look at the verses here, Elijah said something similar in 1 Kings 19, verse 4. Elijah went a day's journey into the wilderness after Jezebel started persecuting him now, when he had that victory against the Baal prophets on the mount, when God answered him and his sacrifice was burned with fire. It came, and he then went and sat in under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It's enough now, O Yahweh, take away my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." So isn't it ironic that Jonah also went and sat under a tree, and then you first go and sit under some shade that God made on day 3 of creation, and the sun that is shining that comes from God, and you should first of all be mindful that at least you've got some shade from the sun, which God provided, but you kind of fall into this mind of thinking that I would rather die when things get tough, right? So Jonah said to Yahweh, "Take, I beseech you, my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." And God said to him, "Do you do well to be angry?" And basically, God is going to say the same to Job. In his talking to Job, he says, "Where were you when I created all these things? Why are you questioning my righteousness? Can you do all the things I'm doing?" Um, Similar echoes in the Bible as to great men in the Bible that were so righteous and perfect, and yet when the amount of pressure on them was so very great, that we should understand that even lesser pressures to us will maybe get us into this mind of thinking, and we should never allow it. Pray to God, do things that we won't get into that state of mind. So where did Job go wrong? Well, it's in too much talking and debating with his friends, who told him, "You sinned, that's why God is punishing you." He started talking too much and wanted God to come and vindicate him immediately. And in that, he wrongly accused God. So, another lesson for us: sometimes Jesus will only be vindicated when he comes back. The people who wrongly murdered him, and in all history up to now, those people are still doing what they did then, people in principle. And it's only when Jesus comes to rule as king that he will be finally vindicated. But he's leaving it up to God to decide when. He doesn't want it to be immediate, because he knows that's not God's plan. And sometimes people have done us wrong. They might never even apologize. Um, we can just pray for them, like you pray for your enemies, that they will see the error of their ways and get forgiveness from God. The forgiveness they must get from us is not even so important. It's more they have to get forgiveness from God. But we don't get impatient and say, I want to be proven right now. And these people accuse me falsely. Prove to them God now, right? It's not in God's plan. God's plan is so much bigger that we can understand why he makes us wait. It's for our own good as well, to learn patience and to be perfect. So we can do it too if Job did it. And we must ask ourselves, didn't we do it in the past, or don't we do it even if there's much lesser trying times? So the lesson, one of the lessons then is we need to develop this mindset that is so convicted that God is in control, that no matter what happens, we never question God. We always speak well of God. And Brother John Popel wrote a book about Job. And the title of that book is Always Speak Well of God. And that is one of the main titles. I think you can summarize the book of God. One of the main lessons. We must always speak well of God under all circumstances. Right. Let's look quickly at Elihu and how he pointed out to Job what he said that was wrong, and therefore he is a very mature young man. Right. So Elihu shows Job what was wrong when he falsely accused God in his um, frustration and anger, which we can understand Job had. Um, but here in Job 33, verse 8, Elihu says, surely you, Job, have spoken in my hearing, and I've heard the voice of your words, and you said, and then he quotes what Job said in verse 9. Job said, I'm clean without transgression, I'm innocent, neither is there any iniquity in me. Now that was true what Job said there. Verse 10, behold, God finds occasion against me and counts me for his enemy. That is not true. Job said that, but it is not true. Doesn't matter what happens to us in our lives, we can never turn around and say that shows that God has become my enemy, because the New Testament is full of verses that shows us that God loves us, and we can be assured that if we go through trying times, it's as trying and difficult for God to see that, but he allows it in his wisdom for either reasons we have to learn or other people might have to learn through us. Job said in verse 11, God put my feet in stocks, he marks all my paths. And then Elihu says, behold, in this you are not judged. I will answer you that God is greater than man, right? And if you go to Job 13:24, that is where Job said these words. If you turn to Job 13:24, you don't have to do it now. The text is on the screen. It says, wherefore do you hide your face and hold me for your enemy? That is what Job said when he was discussing with his three friends. So Elihu, notice Elihu is a person that can listen and remember what is said and quote, and makes sure that he gets things right, not on hearsay. He heard it firsthand, and he can speak to Job about it. Here, Job, in Job 34, verse 5, Elihu says, Job has said, I am righteous, and God hath taken away my judgment. And Job did say that in 20, verse 2 of chapter 27, as God lives, who hath taken away my judgment, and the Almighty who has vexed my soul. So we should understand that God is righteous. He will never take away our judgment. He will never leave us in a situation that proves now there's no more justice and we will never be vindicated. It might be later on in life, but God will never do that. God is not a God that is going to have, he's a God of truth. He's not a God that's going to have injustice flourish in the world and be there forever. He has appointed a day when Jesus will come to judge the world. And in that time, all things will be squared, all justice will be fulfilled if it is not for some reason in God's wisdom done in our lifetime when people have sinned against us. So Elijah's message is very similar to what God would say after. Now, if you go read what God says, he basically says, I am the Almighty One. Nobody can match me. You have no strength, Job. Why are you asking all these questions? Why are you accusing me? Um, and implied in all that, we should just look in awe and praise God for the creation, the universe, everything just shouts out at us that He is in control. So if we really believe, really, really, really are convinced in our hearts that God is all wise and that His way of salvation, obedience to suffering, is perfect way of salvation, we will say, well, yeah, I'm suffering now. It's another way for me to learn obedience or practice it, or whatever other reason is revealed to us at that time or maybe later. Right, we're going to start concluding here because I want to show you something new that I've learned, which is it's quite amazing. So when God now speaks to Job in chapters 38 to 42, Job realizes we are all but dust, like flowers that fade. We need God. God does not need us, and yet He controls the most uncontrollable beast, man and mankind, in his sinfulness, and the terrible consequences that that brings. So, there's this imagery of two beasts in the latter part of this discussion with Job in chapters 40 and so on. And people are always wondering, what beasts are they? Is it a crocodile? Is it a hippopotamus? Is it a dragon? Is it dinosaur or something like that? The point is that it's none of those things. Those beasts are symbolic, and there's a good way of proving this with proper Bible study. They are symbolic of mankind. And if you look at man now, especially in the world now and what is going to come in the near future, the world's out of control. Man, when he's in control, he's like this massive, powerful beast. And in Revelation, um, it's described before when Jesus comes, he destroys this beast, which is made up with the empires, the ruling governments of this world, and the religions, and what all is going on in the world. And if you look at the world, we think it's totally out of control. And God is actually saying to Job, can you tame this beast? Can you fix the world now? Will you be able to bring it back into control? And Job has to say, there is just no ways I can do this. And God says, this beast that looks like it's untamed and can go nowhere, I've got it totally in control, and it's just going to go where I want it to go. And everything is going to work out so that Jesus will return and rule the world. So, in chapter 40, verse 1, God says to Job, shall you contend with the Almighty and instruct him what to do? Can you reprove God? Answer me. And then Job just says, verse 4, he just says, God, I'm vile. What will I answer you? I will rather now keep quiet. Like, when we speak too much, in the back of our minds, we actually know we've gone on too long. Time to keep quiet. Exhortation should not go on and on forever. Therefore, we are coming to a close. So once I've spoken, I will not answer twice, but I will not proceed further. Right. And notice now what happens. Job, after he's been forgiven, becomes a righteous man again. And God restores his fortunes, right? But how did he restore it? All the goods, things that you can replace, your belongings, your cattle, your house. If you lose your car, you can replace your car. He got all that replaced in double. So there's a kind of a nuance here of, in the Old Testament, the firstborn had double portion. Um, and when Jesus comes back, he's going to inherit not just the land of Israel, he's going to inherit so much more than that, the whole earth. Um, and we Jesus is the firstborn. Israel will be the firstborn, is the firstborn nation. They will get their territories round about Jerusalem back. Um, kind of the better inheritance. And we need to understand that we are part of all of that. We can inherit the world with Jesus. But if you look at the verses there, you'll see that children, your family, your children cannot be replaced. If you lose a child, you can never replace that child. If God gives you another child that looks just like that, it would be weird. It can't be. People are so precious. Again, when you were born, you are one in a trillion million chances of you being born. You are absolutely unique. No one ever will be born that is like you ever again or was ever before. Every person is unique. So you can't get your children back now. Uh, God couldn't just replace it for him. But the blessing God gave Job is double of everything. And so we got again 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And then he knows that in the future, in the kingdom, those children, if they are resurrected, which the Bible gives us that indication that his children was righteous, he will have double the amount of children, right? And notice what happens with those daughters that Job had in verse 50. There were in the land no woman found so fair as the daughters of Job, and he gave them inheritance amongst their brethren. The children that he got after he lost the 10, all of them, and especially the daughters, were of such high quality people that he also gave them inheritance equal with their brothers. And then he had 4 generations. He had grandchildren and great grandchildren. And Job died being old and full of days. So notice, Job lived a very long time after he lost his children. And he had this hope of seeing his children again, but it would not happen immediately. It would take a long time. So here we find something very interesting. I used to always read James 5 in the wrong way. So I want to show you something fascinating that we're going to end off with Job and a big lesson for us. Notice the heading in the Bible, patience in suffering. Now, I want to suggest to you that the heading there is already leading us down the wrong path. That heading should be patience after suffering. So James says, notice what James says. He says, brothers, be patient, sisters as well, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waits for the precious fruit of the earth and have long patience for it until he receives the early and latter rain. So notice, if a farmer plants, when is the time of hard work and let's call it suffering? It's when you plant the harvest and you have to plant and prepare the soil, get out in the tractor, do all the hard work. The patience is not then. The patience is after that period of suffering is over. Now you have to believe that God will send the rain, and then the rain comes, and then you have to believe, okay, the plants will grow, and then after a while there will be a harvest. So there's a long patience coming after the suffering, and that patience will you will deal well with that if you're really faithful and you believe the end result will come. So therefore James says in 8, be ye also patient, establish your hearts. The patience is um, achieved by establishing our hearts. In the Greek, I've said it there, to set fast, that is to turn resolutely in a certain direction and to confirm with yourself, to have faith that, yes, the kingdom will come. We set our minds on that. That is the end result God has said, and it will be like that. So I just have to wait in patience and be productive until that comes. And so then he says, while we're doing that, don't grudge against each other. You know, when people have to wait long and they don't get immediate satisfaction, we start to get grumpy and we just want things to happen now. Like Job was during his suffering, which was when the calamity came and he debated with his friends. That was his time of suffering. He was not patient then. So, my brothers, take the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for example, of suffering, affliction, and patience. Notice that the prophets did not have patience in suffering. They suffered. They had to go lay naked on the street. Some of them, like God asked them to do, or do things that was difficult. And then they had to wait and see how their prophecy would come to pass eventually. They had to be patient, right? Is like when it was prophesied that Israel will be overtaken by Babylon and go into the exile. People scorned the prophets when they prophesied that, and then they had to wait when that happened and be patient to see how it all played out. So, behold, verse 11, we count them happy which endure. You have heard of the patience of Job. Notice this patience is not what we discussed when Job had calamity and when Job was in agony discussing with his three friends. That was the suffering. When was the patience of Job? It was when we saw what the end of God was, when God was pitiful and showed him mercy. The patience of Job was when he now had 10 children, but he had to know that I have to wait for 3 generations. Can you imagine when Job saw his great grandchildren? That was such a long time already after he lost his 10 children. But he knew uh, all these family you gave me now, the additional family and the great grandchildren, great grandchildren, how wonderful. It all reminds me that one day I will see my other 10 children. So he became a very patient person. We have to be patient when life is good, like now, and Jesus is not coming back. Jesus is not coming back. The world's getting worse, but we have to know that he will come back. So, when was Job patient? After the discussion with his friends. When was God pitiful to Job? After the discussion with his friends, when he was restored and he then made sacrifices for his friends so that they would also be forgiven. Okay, after he lived a long life seeing his children and grandchildren, right? So, God eases the pain of loved ones that we lose, but that longing to see them again never goes away. The time might erase the pain, but we live with the scar, and time will heal the wound, but the scar remains. Time does not heal all wounds, but the pain becomes part of who you are. And the beauty of all of this is that like what we must do is what I'm going to show you now Job did. We must take the natural things in our lives and make them remind us of this so that we will never lose sight of what God is doing and that He's in control. So notice, I want to suggest to you that you can see this um, in Job's life. Here's just a quick visual to show you. Job got again 10 children, and those 3 daughters were very prominent, uh, fantastic spiritual people that even now got the status of being equal to the brethren and inheriting also land. He got double the sheep and the camels and the cattle and the oxen and the donkeys. So notice now that um, the names of the 3 daughters that Job got after the calamity. Each of those names I would like to suggest to you, and then there is most probably more to this if we go dig deeper. But you will find some kind of connection to the kingdom to come in all these names. Jemima, the first daughter's name is Dove. You know, the dove found a resting place in a new, restored earth when it went out after the flood, and it could come to rest. Lots of nuances there to show us what we are looking for when Jesus comes back and the new kingdom. We will find rest for our souls, no more sorrow, no more longing, and so on. Kezia comes from, the word comes from a bark that is scraped off a tree to make ointment. And in Psalm 45, you might want to make a note of that. That is referred to, that word is used there, and it refers as connection with the way the noble woman that will be at the king's right hand at the festival of the king, like we are the bride of Christ making ourselves ready. They use that to prepare themselves to be with the king. And then Keren Hoopa means a horn of paint, having this idea of the bride making herself beautiful, using this paint or to beautify herself, like makeup in the preparation for the marriage feast with the bridegroom. And all these things give you a slight indication that what Job did, he used his family then, and we can do the same. We should use things in our lives to make us remember and keep it firm in our minds that the kingdom will come. The earth, the total seemingly mess which the world is in, it is, but God is in full control of that beast and will tame it when Jesus comes back. So I will just give you an example what I and Leona do then with this kind of thing in mind, um, before we come to remember Jesus. We lost one child, so we have four children. We always speak of them, that we have four children. We have the hope of Lawrence being resurrected in the kingdom. But pretty soon, as you all know by now, we will have another grandchild, and we will have double the grandchildren than we have children. Will have eight grandchildren. So if that child is born, or even now while it's in the womb, it makes me and Leona think of this kind of doubling up of blessings God gives us in this life to remind us. So, every time we think of our grandchildren, we think of how blessed we are and what the blessings will be, like Job, in the kingdom when everything is restored. There's no more pain. So let's come away then when we look at Jesus. The same applies to Jesus. We will remember now. The suffering was in Jesus' ministry and his crucifixion. But where is the patience for Jesus now? Well, for 2,000 years, he's sitting at the right hand of God, waiting for God to send him back to fulfill the mission and come and rule as king on earth. That is the patience and the wonderful end of God for Jesus that will bring everything to completion. So there was the suffering, but Jesus is still fulfilling the patient part. He sits at the right hand of God, and he is fully in one mind with God, a divine being now, and we will remember that as we take the emblems. And he's not impatient. He knows exactly when God will say, go, that is the right time. And then he will come back to restore everything to this perfect Garden of Eden situation where we will all be with our brothers and sisters and have this spiritual being, body, and a perfect body without any sin in a world that can cause us only joy and praise to God, who is the everlasting creator of all things. Amen.